more than a year now, as tens of thousands of Gazans were killed, the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, had eluded the Israeli military. But that ended on Thursday. Yesterday, the full force of Israel's military and security establishment was brought to bear on the butcher of thousands of Israelis. For months now, he had given shrift to the IDF and its chasing squads. It was widely believed that he was holed up underground in Gaza and that he had taken to keeping himself in the company of hostages in order to protect his life from Israeli hellfire. In the end, though, he was killed above the ground, along with two other militants with no signs of any hostages nearby. The Israeli authorities said they had confirmed Yahya Sinwar's death using dental records and fingerprints. His DNA was also tested for confirmation. Sinwar's death was the most severe blow to Hamas's leadership after more than a year of the escalating conflict in the Middle East. It immediately plunged the war in Gaza into a new and rather uncertain phase. There was both hope and trepidation. Hope that the war might finally end and pave the way for an all-elusive ceasefire. Trepidation for the families of the remaining hostages, and there are close to 100 of them, that their loved ones might be killed to avenge Sinwar's death. This came less than 3 weeks after Israeli forces killed the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, in an airstrike south of Beirut. Some were hoping that Sinwar's death might signal an end to the Israeli invasion of Gaza. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has indicated that the offensive will not stop, even if that meant that all three deadly Hamas leaders, Sinwar, Ismail Haniyeh, the political head, and Mohammad Deif, the military commander, the very engineers of last year's deadly surprise attack on southern Israel on the 7th of October, all three of them have now been killed. Netanyahu told Israelis and the world community in a televised address that whoever sets aside their weapons and returns the hostages, Israel will allow them to leave and to live. But he warned that anyone who harmed Israeli hostages would pay with their lives.
Well, this is not the end of the war in Gaza. It's the beginning of the end. To the people of Gaza, I have a simple message. This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages. Hamas is holding 101 hostages in Gaza, who are citizens of 23 countries, citizens of Israel, but citizens of many other countries. Israel is committed to doing everything in our power to bring all of them home. And Israel will guarantee the safety of all those who return our hostages. But to those who would harm our hostages, I have another message. Israel will hunt you down and bring you to justice.
Israeli leaders have long said that they would not stop the offensive in Gaza until they had crushed Hamas as a military and political force. They also had to free the hostages seized on the 7th of October. About 1,200 people were killed in the attack and 250 were taken as hostages to the city of Gaza. Of the 100 plus hostages who remain in Gaza right now, at least a third of them are believed to be dead. American officials immediately seized upon Sinwar's death to try and renew what has been stalled negotiations, hoping to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza that would free the remaining hostages and at the same time allow more humanitarian aid to go in. President Joe Biden of the US told reporters in Berlin that he had congratulated Netanyahu and would send the Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Israel in the next few days. Now is the time to move on, Biden said, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza.
Now is the time to move on. Move on to move toward a ceasefire in Gaza. Make sure that we're moving in the direction that we're going to be in a position to make things better for the whole world. It's time to get forward and end. The previous hostage is home.
Yahya Sinwar, a longtime Hamas leader who assumed its top political office back in August, was known among supporters and enemies for combining both his cunning and his brutality. He built the Hamas's ability to harm Israel in service of the group's long-term goal, that is to destroy the Jewish state and in its place build an Islamist Palestinian nation. He played a central role in planning the surprise attack that happened in southern Israel on the 7th of October 2023. As the leader of Hamas in Gaza from 2017 to 2024, Sinwar quietly rekindled the group's relationship with Iran, which is a long-time patron, helping Hamas develop the ability to outsmart Israel's defenses. And all the while he was doing this, he was covertly preparing for a giant war with Israel. That war began on the 7th of October last year. Yahya Sinwar was born in 1962 in Khan Younis in the southern Gaza Strip. It is a crowded, impoverished territory. It is much like most of the rest of Gaza. The inhabitants, in fact his family and his family members, were registered Palestinian refugees who had fled in the 1948 war. Sinwar studied Arabic at the Islamic University of Gaza. He became involved in Islamist politics around the start of the first Palestinian uprising, or the Intifada, against Israel's occupation, which happened in 1987. Palestinian Islamists founded Hamas. They pledged to destroy Israel and replace it with a Palestinian state. Israel, the United States, and other countries designated Yahya Sinwar as a terrorist and Hamas as a terrorist organization. He was in an Israeli prison for more than 2 decades and was later released only in 2011 as part of a prisoner swap arrangement to free an Israeli soldier who was taken into captivity. Negotiations for a ceasefire deal to release the remaining hostages has stalled, partly because Yahya Sinwar held out for a permanent agreement. He wanted a truce that would allow Hamas to retain power in a post-war Gaza. This was seen as a maximalist stand, and that was incompatible with that of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister. Netanyahu sought a temporary truce that would allow Israel to return to battle within weeks. He wanted to prevent Hamas's long-term survival, to crush it both militarily and politically. And in between these two incompatible stands, the ceasefire hung in the balance. But after Sinwar's death, Hamas's remaining leadership is now demoralized, it is afraid, and that could possibly open the doors to a ceasefire. It could agree the current leadership of Hamas, or the one that's going to replace Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh, they could agree to compromises that Sinwar could not. In Israel, Netanyahu could make the argument that Hamas has been defeated without the need for any continuation of war. Hamas's remaining leadership is still unlikely to withdraw its demand for a permanent ceasefire or to accept permanent Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip. Hamas's new leadership, though, might be more willing than Sinwar to hand over power to a technocratic Palestinian government in order to ensure that Hamas itself can survive in some form or fashion. It could also show more flexibility in the negotiations over the hostages, perhaps even agreeing to exchanging more hostages for fewer Palestinian prisoners. Ending the war in Gaza would not immediately contain Israel's war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, where there is an Israeli ground invasion that's ongoing, or likely not end its conflict with Iran. In retaliation to Iran's ballistic missile attack a few weeks ago, that could happen as soon as the next few days. The Israeli war machine never tires.